Welcome to Annette on Life, Liberty, and Happiness, a podcast about the Constitution, politics, history, and the culture, and pretty much anything else I want to talk about, which you'll see today because I'm going off the beaten path a lot today. But if you know me, then you'll know that I had a previous podcast called LDS Unmarried Life. And so this one kind of harkens back to that because I'm still single and still a member of the church. And so that topic still interests me. The podcast can be found on AnnetteTalks.com, iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify. And you can see the video of this podcast on YouTube as well. So I'm probably going to be holding up some visuals. So if you want to see what those look like, go to YouTube and watch this. And what we're going to be talking about today, I have a guest, Kevin Baker. Say hi, Kevin.
Hi.
And Kevin has become a friend of mine. We both have sadly become sort of experts at being single and members of our church. And we've spoken in the past, but I want to read his little bio that is on the back of the book that we're going to be talking about today, which happens to be a comic book. And it says, Kevin L. Baker is a successful corporate attorney and works with large international companies. Kevin graduated from Brigham Young University with a Bachelor of Science in International Corporate Finance and 2 minors, German and music. He also graduated from the University of Oregon with a Master of Business Administration and a Juris Doctorate in Law. Another lawyer. I like lawyers that are doing things besides lawyering, since I'm one of those. So I like the fact that you're doing something as far out as comic book writing. It's very different from lawyering. And so you've written a comic book recently and published it, right?
I have. This is actually the second book that I've published. And Annette, thank you again for having me on. This is the second time we've done a podcast together. I feel like I'm a repeat offender and, time off for good behavior or something. I think I'm actually kind of grateful that I'm in your other category. I think talking about the things you talk about are important, and I'm grateful that you've taken a lot of interest in the work that I've been doing to help single adults kind of deal with being single, kind of the singleness that we face. The first book I wrote was The Greatest Worth, which is a book about how do we deal with. Oh, you got a picture of it? Great, I love that.
There's the book. I read it when we first started talking back in the day, and then we podcasted about it. So if anyone's interested in hearing that episode, it's on AnnetteTalks.com, and you can go find that.
Yeah, you called it the definitive work for being single. So I've always
appreciated that. It is. It covers it all.
Yeah. So the comic book is a little bit different. It's it's designed to be funny. It's designed to, for people to just have a glimpse of what it's like to be single and to have a laugh about it, to find some joy and humor in the experiences that we have. And actually the comic book derived from The Greatest Worth. I was struggling when I was writing The Greatest Worth, which took me many years to do, to explain and articulate some of the experiences that we have. And so I came up with this idea of a comic for beginning each of the chapters. And as I went through the comics, I thought, well, these are funny. And so I decided to make more, and it kind of cascaded into this new comic book, which I call Under New Management. And I've really enjoyed putting it together.
So why is it called Under New Management?
Well, first and foremost, I'm divorced, okay? And so I wrote it because I'm now under new management. And so it was a different perspective of my life. It's a different look into, how do I deal with the realities of now being single again after being married? And you'll see the title is Under New Management, and then there's a sign on there that's work in progress. And so it's kind of a little glip at myself and saying, I'm trying to be better and to do better. And it was funny. And I deal with these kind of things in my employment. I work with mining companies and natural resources. So, it was something that was personal for me.
So, because my thought was when he was married, was he under his wife's management? And then now he's single, so he gets to manage himself. Is that what that's supposed to mean?
No, but maybe there's a little bit deeper in that. Certainly under the management of the relationship for sure, but I'm definitely under management now.
Well, I think we all kind of feel like that, that are single. there's a lot of humor in being single, and a lot of times you have to choose between laughing and crying, because you get into a lot of funny situations. And so I really appreciated your comic book for that. But I related to a lot of it. Although I have to say that a lot of the theme of the comic book was about the short guy getting dissed. And since I'm short, I'm less than 5'2", so I'm always looking for guys under 6 foot or under 5'10" is even more preferable. And so I did not relate to that at all. I kept thinking, who are all these women that want these tall men? Was that a personal thing for you, Kevin?
It was a personal thing for me, and that maybe comes out in a couple of the comics. Now, I'll be honest with you, they're funny. They're meant to be a joke. So I'm not trying to make fun of any particular group. But yes, there are some comics in there that relate to the height. And, honestly, I think it's funny. I think that's great material to look at. When I get on Facebook pages and a lot of people will talk about, I won't date a person unless they're a certain height or and the guys will always reply, well, then I don't want to date someone who, unless they're a certain size or something.
Right.
And so there's this debate that goes on between physical characteristic, and I think that these comics are important because they raise the question of, okay, what are the criteria that we have for dating? And if we have criteria that's too exclusive, does that exclude people out? And how do we deal with those going forward? Those are really sort of the basis for some of those comics that I made.
And by the way, I always think that those conversations that start in those groups are a really bad idea. They never go to a good place,
They never do.
Issues start popping up. That's why I don't go into those groups very much anymore, because I would rather do fun things and make humor out of it like you have. Oh, well, here's one that I'm going to show. And it's not really about height, but it's kind of obliquely. It says you must be this tall to ride, which is you must be this tall to ride the LDS dating roller coaster.
Yes. This is actually one of my favorite comics, probably the one that you were talking about. It's actually one of the first comics I actually ever made was that one. And, I always just felt like I was too short to be into the dating scene and that everybody else was having a lot of fun. And then I thought, well, what if it was like a roller coaster at an amusement park? And then I was too short to under the sign. And that was where the genesis of that comic came from. But I think it's funny. It's not meant to hurt people's feelings. They're jokes, but I do think that they ask questions. These comics are designed to ask questions about the realities of our circumstances.
Right. Well, I had an idea for your next comic book. So I don't know if I'm the only single person that feels this way, or maybe it's just my own weirdness, but I tend to have this this thought of, I don't know if you've ever heard this joke about, I don't want to join any country club that would have me as a member. So I made this comment on Facebook the other day, and it said, me, why don't I ever get any matches on my dating app? And then it said, also me, oh, look, I matched. What's wrong with him? And so I tend to like, I'm always not happy with the fact that I don't get any matches because I keep it local. I don't want to date out of my area. And so I almost never get a match because I'm in Denver and I'm not in Utah. But whenever I travel to Utah, I have like 100 guys to scroll through.
Yeah.
But here in Denver, I'm lucky to get a new guy every other week or so. And so when I do actually match, that's my first thought. Okay, what's wrong with this guy? So either that says I don't trust men enough, and I think that there's something wrong with all of them, or it means that if a guy likes me, then there's something wrong with him because he likes me. I'm not sure what that means yet.
Yeah.
But I think that would make a good comic, just an FYI.
I think you're great. I'll work on that one. I think dating, it really comes down to, the fundamental questions that I try to ask myself when I'm making comics is what happens when our relational expectations meet our individual realities?
Yes.
I think all of us in the United States and the world, we want to have relationships and all. In fact, we're coming to a point where there are going to be more single people in the United States than there are married people. I think it's almost 50% right now, and it's whether that's because people aren't getting married, or because they're divorced, or have had failed relationships, or because they're widowed and survived a relationship, or otherwise. And so I think all of us are trying in some way to have relationships, and it's always been funny to me to look at the expectations of what we think we're going to have in the other person. better than what they actually are. We put them on pedestals, or we have these, like we talked about, physical characteristic expectations, certain height, certain weight, certain size, or whatever it is, certain dollar amount that they make, whatever it is that we have in our expectations. But I think the reality is that we run into that those people don't really exist, and or have a harder time finding them. And so it's like there's this oddity and this hilarity that ensues as we try to pursue what our expectations are, and then what we have when we face the reality of what we actually have. And the question then comes, can we have a relationship? And what happens as we go through those things which I tried to explore in this comic book.
Right. Well, I know my parents and my friends harass me because they think I'm looking for a unicorn. And so, yeah, I guess I have a list. Oh, well, although I have to tell you that physical characteristics are not on that list. It's other stuff that's probably too ridiculous. But it reminds me of this one comic of yours that I'm going to hold up. And
That's
this
a good
is the one where it talks about, it says that the LDS, any good man can marry any good woman and have a successful marriage experiment. And I think that comes from Spencer W. Kimball, doesn't it? I think he's the one that said that any good man, any good woman can be happy in a marriage together. And, and one of the other scientists, there are two scientists looking at this explosion from this experiment. And he says, you know what they say, if at first you don't succeed, try again. And so I'm wondering, does that mean that people are getting married again and again, again? Because that's kind of the opposite of what you're saying, that people are too picky and they're not going to find what they're looking for. This is saying we've been told that any man and any woman can make it happen, but obviously it doesn't always work.
Yeah, and that comic, I think, is an especially funny comic because we are taught in the church, and we believe this is that our faith will overcome the deficiencies of other people, and that if we forgive people, and the closer we come to deity, the closer we come to each other, and so therefore we believe that any good righteous person can have a successful relationship. I've seen that magnified. I wrote about this in The Greatest Worth, is that, people will say, well, it doesn't matter who they get married as long as they're a married member of the church, or they have a temple recommend. They're active. And I always thought that for me, that wasn't the case, that there's more to relationships than just their church membership or the type or the way that they practice their faith. I'm not saying that's not important. It is in our lives, but there's more to it. And I think what happens is that people will get into relationships for one expectation, whether that's for their religion or whatever, and then struggle because the reality is different. And so we cycle through these types of relationships. And I think there's this new issue in the church where more and more people are getting divorced, and that's becoming more common. I'm divorced. I have to go find another relationship in my life. And so I looked at it as an experiment. That's why it's a scientific experiment where people are constantly trying to figure out what works and what doesn't. It's like Thomas Edison, who spent come 1,000 times to get the light bulb right, that kind of stuff. Right. So I thought that was funny to think about our relationships and think, well, this is an experiment, and can two good people actually make a healthy relationship work, and what actually happens in the byproducts of that as we go through that experiment.
Right. Which reminds me of another thing I wanted to bring up, was that because that I did this 30-day Bay challenge thing.
You had a comment about that too.
Yes. And so if anyone's curious, they can go to my YouTube channel, Annette Talks YouTube, and I did this 30-day experiment. I have some skin in the game. Before I wrote the book on dating after divorce, well, actually, I did this afterwards because I thought I need some more skin in the game since I wrote the book. And so I did this whole 30-day thing, and it was really interesting that I was chronicling it every day on YouTube. I took Sundays off because I needed a break, which tells you it was not an easy thing to do. It was really hard. And by the end of it, I was ready for it to be over. So ready. And so you took that concept and ran with it, and you sent me a comic. I should have printed it out. Darn it, I don't know where it is. But tell me the gist of that comic.
Well, the gist of the comic was, I think the principle of a 30-day bay is that we're just going to set aside what our expectations are, and we're going to get to know the person and to see whether or not we can have a relationship outside of what our expectations are. I think that experiment you did was wonderful. I think, the idea and the concept behind it is tremendous in terms of forming relationships. It's to get outside of ourselves to make this. And but the concept is like, the closer you get to your 30 days, it's like, I can't wait to get out of this relationship. Like it's like you're panting to get to the end of a marathon, and it's like I'm waiting for it to be done, and then the very next day you're like, I'm alone and I don't want to be. So it's a dichotomy of, okay, we go through it, and it's single people who, to put to your point, all of us want to have relationships, but then when we actually get into it, it's like we don't want to have the relationship anymore, and then we don't have it, and then we want it again. So it's this. I think there's a polarity in circumstances.
Yeah, it is a weird thing how we never seem to be happy with where we're at. Although that reminds me of my hierarchy, and I don't know where I got this from, but to me, the happiest state is happily married, and then the second happiest state is happily single, and then the third state is unhappily single, and then the fourth bottom is unhappily married. And
That's a great comic. I'm gonna have to make something out of that.
Yes, please make a comic out of that, because I like it. And so I remind myself about that because I've been unhappily married, and I know what that's like. So I should not be in a big hurry from going from happily single to possibly unhappily married, because I'm in the second tier. It's not too bad. We all want happily married, but you don't want to rush into married thinking it's automatically going to be happy, because we know that it's not. So also, that reminds me of something else that a member of my ward recently told me is, I teach gospel doctrine, and I'm in there talking about my dating life and how I wasn't going to date someone outside of our faith. And I listed out the reasons why. And he's like, oh, good luck, And so later he came to me and he said, I've been serving in the church for 40 years. And from what I've seen in the marriages, and maybe I shouldn't be saying this, but it stuck with me. Something like 10% of marriages that you see in the church are what he terms celestial marriage or heavenly marriages, what we all kind of picture what we want. 40% are broken and irreparable. And then the rest are somewhere in between.
Yeah.
And so, it sounds like a really bad statistic, kind of like that statistic about 80% of men leaving the church when they get divorced, which I totally believe. But what has stuck with me was the 10% that are celestial. So the thought in my mind is, that's what I'm shooting for. And so when I find someone else that's shooting for that, and I think it's a good match, then I'm going for it, because I want that. And I think I can do it. And I think we can all do it if we really, handle this thing right. And that reminds me of one of my favorite comics from your book that I wanted to bring up, because I totally related to it. This is for members of the church. We're only going to really get this, but this is some of the changes that came about in the church recently. I don't know if you could see that whole thing. There we go. Basically, it says, Kevin, because you're always the guy in the comic, right? Yeah. Kevin, did you hear about the new temple policy? No, what is it? Divorced men and single men over 31 can now serve as ordinance workers. Well, that's fantastic. Now, if we can get them to go to church, we might actually have something. And so I totally relate to that, because 80% of men leave the church when they're divorced and 40% of women. So obviously there's a little disparity in the numbers there. And it would be so great if we could even that out a little bit.
Yeah, I wrote that comic because of the change in church. Every once in a while, the church will make a change in church policy, and I love it when the church makes it. I'm not making fun of the church. I'm trying to make fun of the circumstance.
No, I know. That's why I liked it, because I think that's great too, that I love all the changes they've made, but it was funny. It is funny that you got to get them to come first.
Yeah, it was funny because I was a temple ordinance worker when I did it, and I was single, and I couldn't they only let me serve in the baptistry because of that. And they've now made a change where single people can now serve in other places in the temple. But it just struck me as great. We're making this change for the temple, but the real issue isn't that they're not going to temple. The issue is that they're not going to church, and we've got to do that first.
Yes, it's a big issue. So your inspiration for comics is basically real life and what you've been through.
My inspiration. Well, yeah. Well, there's a lot of different forms of inspiration. It's more circumstantial than anyone else. I used to joke that people ask me if these comics actually happened to me or not. I said some of them did, but I'll let people make that decision.
Oh, okay. Does that mean that you're on your phone during sacrament meeting the whole time?
Yes.
Because I saw 2 comics about that. One was, you told the bishop, I think, oh, darn, I left my phone at home. And he's like, oh, yeah, it's okay. You'll get it later. And your response was, no, now I have to pay attention during sacrament meeting.
It's true.
And then the other one was that you wanted to find a place to sit where you could charge your phone or something.
Charging station. That was the goal, is to get there or have a battery that would last long enough to get through the meeting.
There aren't charging stations that I'm aware of.
No, I thought that was funny too, but
that is.
I had this vision of something in the church, like at the airport where you can just plug in behind the pew. But
that's such a bad idea. Yeah, because there's so many people like you, not me. I'm never admitting to that, who are on their phones. I have to sit there and put several times during sacrament meeting, putting the phone back in my purse. I'm like, okay, no, I shouldn't be Facebooking during church. So phone back in purse. So what's your process for writing these comics?
Well, it's a lot. Look, these comics are fun. It's more of a hobby for me. I spend a lot of time doing them. I'm not an artist, so I have to hire an artist to do them. So I work with people who are outside of the country and to make sure that the situation is right. So I'll draw them out. I'll storyboard them on pieces of paper. I'll write the jokes. I'll rewrite it. There's an editing process that goes on before it. Then I'll send it off to the artist to be drawn up, and then they'll send it back to me. It's all done electronically, and their English isn't so good, so they don't speak English very well. So I have to. There's a lot of corrections that have to occur. So there's a back and forth. That's interesting.
Are they in India by chance?
Indonesia is where this particular artist is. So
interesting.
I think it's a great situation for them, and it's a great situation for me to do that. So there's a back and forth, and they come back in a black and white version, and so a lot of the lines aren't crisp, and so I have to spend a lot of time editing. I'll clean them up. I have a computer program. I'm actually learning how to use that, an Illustrator program, and then I will color them, and sometimes I actually have to re-edit them after they're done to make them final. So I probably spend 5 to 10 hours on each comic to make it and to get it ready into some type of a way it can be produced.
Up on my end. Okay, so you have to go in and color it yourself and edit yourself and all sorts of things after you get it back. Well, they look very professional. I mean, I wouldn't know. I'm going to hold up this one again so everyone can see. Where do people find this comic book, by the way?
You can get it on Amazon.com. That's the best place to get it. I wanted it to be valuable, so that it's in color and it's expensive to produce these. So it's $20 for the book, but I wanted people to also have access to it. If they want it electronically, there's an ebook for $5 as well. So.
Oh, that's nice.
So my goal was to make people laugh and to give them some value in the things. If you buy the paperback book, it's something that you can put on your coffee table or something, and people can look at it and have a good jolly over it.
No, I think it's great. I think most single people should have this in their house. If for nothing else, it's a Friday night, they're sitting around with no date. Or even better, it's a Friday night and they have a date at their house. But let's say the date's not going so well. Hey, let's pull out a comic book.
Idea. It's a great conversation starter to read.
It is, maybe you don't have much to talk about.
Yeah.
You don't have a lot in common, and hey, let's bring up some comics. They are fun.
It's really interesting. I get people sending me notes and things like that, and it's funny. I mean, there's a couple things that I think are funny about it. One is the topic. The topic is really what drives the comics themselves. It's an important topic. There's not a lot of comics out there that talk about dating relationships in a sort of a clean kind of way, but it's also relatable. And I think people will write me a note and say, I really thought that was true. And I take great pride when people look at it and say, you know what, that's the situation. And I think that's where comedy comes from, is finding something in our lives that we can relate to, where we can put ourselves in that situation and ask ourselves, how would we react to that? How would I do that? And are the questions and topics important? And so I think it's for that reason, I think the comic book is good for all people.
Oh, yeah. Well, the more close to reality is, the funnier it is. It's if you can't relate to it all, then it's not funny. It's also, it shows a lot of your vulnerability, which is nice, because people are like, oh, you mean somebody else actually goes through the same thing? Oh, here, I had to pull up another one of my favorites. This is a Prison Breaks one.
Yes, that is one of my favorite comics.
Is that the one on your, I can't remember, is this on the back of your?
That is the one I put on the back of this particular book. And it's this idea that people who are single, at least faith-based singles, they want to get married, and that's all they think about is how quickly can I get married? Mm-hmm. And I think sometimes they forget about living their lives as a result. And so I compared it to that situation. I think it's a hilarious comic. Yeah, it says LDS dating is like going to prison. Everyone believes they shouldn't be there, and the only thing they think about is how to get out. Yeah. Well, and but the. If people want to temper that feeling, just look around at some of the people that are coming back. I've had in the last 4 or 5 months, 2 people come back to the dating scene that had gotten married less than a year ago, and I thought, oh boy, no, it's all right. I can hang. I'm good. Because you get out and you don't want to come back. So if you're going to get out, you got to make sure you're going to permanently get out. Exactly. And not come back. How awkward that must be, huh? I really hope to not. I feel bad for them because I think, well, what if I do make another mistake and end up coming back? I hope they don't look at me the same way I'm looking at them. Like, yeah, that sucks. Sucks for you. Let me to go back on your comment about vulnerability here for just a second. I had kind of a funny experience because a lot of these comics are about me being vulnerable about myself. Now, like I said, I'm not trying to offend people. Sometimes I'm not trying to say this is what I think. I'm just trying to talk about the experience and the situation. But I showed this to a friend of mine who happens to be a family therapist, a counselor. Okay. She looked at it, she read it, she got furrowed, and she says, "Kevin, we need to talk." It's like, okay, they're jokes, okay. Yeah, I'm glad you clarified that. Well, I kind of had similar reaction to some of them too, because remember I messaged you and I said, "Is this really the way you see things?" Because we should talk, Kevin. We should talk. But yeah, I mean, your book was full of vulnerability as well. And yeah, I think I cried at the beginning, when you were telling your story, and not so much because I felt sorry for you, but because I related to it, and I don't think many people realize how much what they're experiencing, so many other people are experiencing as well, which is nice. Which is why it's nice when there are books and comics and things that come out that they can relate to, because then you don't feel so alone. What, you mean someone else feels the same way? Someone else has gone through some of the same experience? There was another comic I wanted to show real quick. So if you're listening to this just as a podcast, I recommend taking a look at the YouTube video, and even better, going to Amazon and finding this. I'm going to link to the Amazon link in my show notes so people can go directly there. Okay, here we go. Oh, yeah. This is one of my favorites too. This is it says the Latter-day Saint dating hoops, and it's got you, Kevin, standing there, getting ready to go through 3 hoops, and it looks like the first one's barbed wire. I can't tell what the second one is. Razor blades, maybe. Razor blades, yep. And the third one is fire, and then there is sharks, alligators, snakes, and like thorns or something, sharp things. And yeah, trying to get through those hoops. I'm guessing on the other end it's supposed to be like, marriage or something. But that's the way it feels oftentimes. Yeah. Tell me what you liked about that. I mean, I know why I wrote that one, but I'd love to hear what you thought about it in terms of your life. Because you have to go through so many painful things. I mean, dating, first of all, it's like a part-time job. It takes a whole lot of work. But secondly, it can be really painful. And so if you can keep going through all those painful things, and then there's the dangers, well, the crocodiles and the sharks and everything, I guess that I would see that as, this is when I've given up, I'm done, I can't do this anymore, or I stumbled and fell and I totally screwed up that relationship. So if you can get through all the hoops and not fail, you just keep persevering, then you'll make it through to the other end. Although the other end may just mean dying happily single. I don't know. Because again, I would rather be happily single than unhappily married. I'm going to make a comic. I promise you I'll make a comic out of that. I'll think about that. Yeah,
Yay.
but I wrote that comic. It's along those lines. For me, it was about the futility of trying to go through experiences, the expectations that you have. Can I actually meet it? Can I get through the hoops itself? And then the peril that was fraught along with it, the risk that we take in being vulnerable, you know, and what would happen, or the consequences that would happen if we actually make a mistake as we go through that. And I think a lot of times, especially in faith-based dating, where it's a church, there are these huge, again, expectations about how we date and where we date. Can we get through those? And if we fail to meet them, what actually happens through it? And I've felt that in my life. And, you know, that comic is definitely a favorite of mine because of that.
Good times. These are, yeah, they're all great comics. I printed out a whole bunch because they were so fun. I have not been on a cruise. You had a couple about cruises and what's expected on cruises. I've never been on one, but it makes me kind of curious to see. Like this one says pre-cruise orientation meeting, and you're telling your friend, before going on the ship, it's important to understand the rules of the game. And then the rules are, number one, just because you come with someone does not mean you leave with them. 2, all commitments are soft until hump day. Otherwise, you might get stuck with someone you really don't like. 3, a 10-minute conversation does not an eternal marriage make. And so, have you been on these cruises? I know you're getting ready to go. The one you're going on soon, is it a singles?
I love going on these cruises. In fact, they're the universe of these LDS cruises are like a microcosm of LDS dating. And
ooh, that sounds bad.
They are so much fun. If anybody's single and hasn't gone on a singles cruise, I'd totally recommend it. You know, but I observe how people come in. You get 200 single adults in one group, and how.
Okay, how many women to men?
It depends. I mean, I was on a cruise a couple years ago where there were more men than there were women. We call it the more men cruise, is what we call it.
That's shocking.
You know, and sometimes it's, sometimes it can be significantly more men than there are, or more women than there are to men. Usually it's about even. So I think there are better odds on the cruises than in the wards and stuff like that. But it's always fun for me to watch how people come together who don't know each other in these groups, in these sort of kind of fantasy island type situations. But what happens, it's like the Bachelor kind of stuff, and how do you react to it, and what do people think? You know, some people come in. So I've seen people bring their girlfriends and their boyfriends come on these singles cruises together. I always thought that was odd. That's why
that is weird.
There is because if they come with them, everybody's there trying to, to interact with other people, and they may actually find something. It's like Temptation Island or something else like that. They may end their relationship. Some don't, but I observe that. Other ones where people come in and say, oh, I talked to this person for 10 minutes and we're going to have a relationship as a result. And those expectations and the reality of that came through. And the hump day one was about people. People will go to lots of different people in these cruises in a very short time period. And they'll say, oh, I like you on day 1, but on day 4, and it's a 7-day cruise, I don't like you anymore because I like this other person. And so you always wanted to be careful about how you interact with people and the level of relationships that you have on an early stage, because you might get stuck with something you don't like. I thought was funny. So
that sounds like speed dating.
It is like speed dating. That's a great example of it.
Huh. That makes me think that would be all right. Speed dating is fun, but yeah, you've got to move on quickly if it's someone you're not that into. The hard part is making sure that you don't hurt feelings, and you got to be pretty careful about how you engage.
Hence the rules.
Yeah. That's why dating is not really a good time to me. But I do think maybe I will have to check out one of those cruises. Is that what you're going on? You told me you were going to be going on.
Yeah, I'm going on this one. In fact, the cruise director is the person standing up and giving the rules on there.
Oh, okay.
That's Sherry Sandlin. She's a very good friend of mine. She puts these on every year, and I put her in it with her permission, of course, and she helped me with that. So I'll put friends and people I know and relationships into these comics as well. That's fun for me. Oh,
that's cool. Yeah. Yeah, I would like to be in a comic if you can make that happen.
Let's see if I can do that.
So I want to let all the ladies that are listening out there know that Kevin, you're a really high quality guy, and they should check you out. You're in Minneapolis, right?
I am in Minneapolis. That's correct. I've been here for about 7 years.
All right. So it must be hard finding many LDS women to date there. I'm just guessing.
Well, the single scene is not as prevalent as it is in other places of the country. That's true. So, you have to find other things to do. But we have a good singles group here. There's not a lot of dating that goes on but it's a lot like Denver and other places where it's smaller, and so you have to go outside of the area to find interactions that are important to you.
Yeah, just curious, do you ever do the long distance thing?
Yeah, I did.
Then you need to do a comic about that. You need to do
several of them on it.
because that to me, I wrote about that in my book, and I talked about that on my podcast about long distance is like an angel would have to come down and say, you will do this long distance relationship. Yeah. And see, there's a comic for you, because I've always thought I wanted someone that's close enough to come over if I could see a big spider on the wall or something like that. So I think that's a good.
I'm actually working on a comic on that concept right now, where the top of it is long distance relationships in Minnesota. And it's a picture of the United States with an arrow from Minnesota to Utah. And then the bottom half is long distance relationships in Utah. And it's a picture of Salt Lake City with an arrow up to Provo.
Right.
So, I think everybody has a different idea of what long distance relationships are and what that means. And, some people, long distance relationship could be 10 minutes down the road. Other people, long distance relationship could be across the country. I have friends who have married out of long distance. I got married from a long distance relationship. It didn't work out, and that was part of the reason. But it's funny to me to understand what is it that we're willing to engage in, and how far are we willing to go, both emotionally and physically, or geographically, if you will, to have those relationships.
Right. Well, and sometimes you can have a relationship that's not long distance, but it feels like it is.
Yeah.
That's why I'm no longer in my most. You can use that too if you want. I was dating a guy that was only 26 minutes away, which is pretty good, especially for Colorado. But the amount of time that we saw each other felt like long distance. So I'm like, what is the point to this? So yeah, geography is not 100% important, but it is fairly important. So is there anything specific that you wanted people to know about your comics?
Yeah, there's a couple things I wanted to know. I mean, there's some inside jokes that people aren't going to get first and foremost, but I try to you talk about sort of the male perspective for me earlier, you and I talked about that, but I also wanted you to know that there's a female perspective in here. So when you see the comic and it's just two guys, it's me and my brother. On the bottom. So it's me and my brother on the bottom. It's funny, someone sent me a note the other day and says, hey, that comic looks just like you. I was like, yeah, it's supposed to be me. I don't know how to respond to that. But
he said, well, you're pretty quick on the uptake there.
That was funny to me. But so if it's two guys on the bottom, it's the guy's perspective. Okay. But if it's two girls on the bottom, it's the girl's perspective. And I've just had so much fun trying to figure out, well, how would a guy look at this particular situation? And how would a girl look at this particular situation? And what's the relationship to it? If it's a guy and a girl, me and another girl, then it's sort of a universal perspective on it. So there's these concepts in the comics themselves that I'm trying to develop. There's also, there's some main characters in it. There's me, there's my brother, there's this girl named Jill, but I haven't decided whether Jill's a friend or if she's a relational interest, or whether or not, because I always thought that, we have all these people in our lives and we just don't know. Are they a friend? Are we just going to hang out? So I don't really define it in the comics, and that's intentional. And so I try to make sure, well, she talks about her boyfriend and, but then we talk about dating stuff. And so you never really know. And I think that's part of how relationships go, is that you never really know. And then I've got this, every once in a while I'll pop in this character called Phil, and he's really my favorite character. And he's an alien. And
oh, yeah.
People have asked me about why I have it, just kind of pop him in there randomly. And Phil is the odd guy that's really nice, that never gets a date, that's in the background. People always laugh at him or make jokes or things like that, but he's a good guy. And he just it's a foreign experience. And so I plug him into these comics.
I found one with him in it.
Yes, that's a great comic. So I'll plug him in, and whenever people see him, it's not that he's an extraterrestrial. It's just that he's a foreign person that people that's a good guy, but has a difficult time relating with other people. And so I see that a lot with people. I felt that way myself, and so I see a lot of myself in Phil, and I love plugging him in every once in a while.
That was going to be my next question. Was that inspired by you a little bit? Well, I think we all feel that at times in certain situations. And that's the ones where you kind of slink out the door because you're like, okay, I'm done here.
Yeah.
I've had enough of this. But no, that reminded me of another comic I was just looking for. I don't think I printed it, but you said the girl's perspective. Well, first of all, I want to say, if you ever want a female perspective or a female opinion on something you've written that's supposed to be from the female perspective, I'd be happy to give you my opinion on that.
I love that.
Because I think some of them I'm like, who are these women that he thinks think this way? But anyway, there's one where there's two pools and there's a woman getting ready to swim, and in one pool it says the guys that want to date me, and then the other one says the guys that I want to date, or something like that. Yeah. And then she's like, why? Or someone, I don't know if it was you or her, but saying, why are those pools separate? Like, why are they not the same pool? And I think we totally relate to that, because it always feels like that. I can tell you that there's a pool of guys that I know that are interested in me. And some of them fit that description you were talking about of that Jill. Yeah. You're like, I'm not really sure what's going on here, like if they don't pursue me, but they show interest, it's like, okay, I don't know. So they're there. And then there's another pool over here, in Denver. I can't say there's really much of a pool on the other side of guys that I want to date right now. Because I've been, a single for 4.5 years, and until new guys come in, I've kind of dated all the ones that I can get to date me that I want to date. So that other pool is kind of empty. But it is a weird situation to be in, where you don't know exactly what everybody is,
Yeah. That's what I love about these comics, and that's what there's a humanness. There's just a human experience in these comics that people relate to. And I just think it's worth exploring. I think it's worth writing about. And I want to become a better writer for these type of experiences. This is the first of, I hope to be a series of comics, and I hope to put other books out. And I want people to relate and say, yeah, that's something I've experienced and can relate to.
Awesome. Well, you did a great job. It's a very funny book. And I think everyone would get something out of it, single or not. LDS or not. So I recommend everyone go to Amazon and find, what's it called, Under New Management?
It's the LDS Singles Guy Under New Management. You can also link to it on my website. You can go to www.theldssinglesguy.com. I have a blog there there's resources you can use. You can find my other book, The Greatest Worth. You can find other comics on there. You can find all sorts of resources for singles on there. My sole goal is really to say I really care about single adults, because I am one, and I want them to have resources to make their lives a little bit better. Because I think, and I said this is a quote I wrote and I wrote it on the webpage. I think it's finding humor in our circumstances is really the key to finding joy in our journey. It's about finding a way to look at things in a positive light instead of a negative light. And I hope that that's what this comic book does, and that it helps people. I do think it's worth it. I think it adds value, and I hope people really become interested in it.
Definitely. It's good. And I still want to know what you'll do if you get married. Are you going to have the LDS married guy?
No, the LDS married guy might be divorced if I did something like that.
Well, no, it's great. You've taken this situation and used it as a creative outlet and had fun with it. I think that's super healthy and a super great thing to do. And it'll benefit people that decide to take a look at your book and buy it and read it and have fun with it. So keep me posted, especially when the next one comes out, and any other comics that you want to send my way. I always like it when you text me a comic, when you see my some Facebook comment and you text me a comment, you say, hey, a comic, you say, hey, this looks kind of like what you just said. So that's fun. I enjoy that. Keep doing that. All right, Kevin, thanks for joining me. I will link to your website and to the Amazon website for your book on my show notes. Again, if you're listening, you can find this podcast on AnnetteTalks.com, iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, YouTube, yada, yada, et cetera, et cetera. And thanks for joining me again, Kevin, and thank everyone for listening.